Today we're going to be talking about the end of World War II and then moving on into the post-war era. I'm going to go through this presentation with you, but I'm going to encourage you to go back and try to refer to a lot of the movies that I talked about to help to give you a visual, and also go through the PowerPoint in the content section, and you'll be able to click on various pictures and it'll take you to a link so that you get kind of a visual effect and more so of a virtual experience of what it was like at the end of the war, and also in battling many of those issues and atrocities that the soldiers had to face during this time. So Hitler, as we know, has really taken the world by storm during this post-World War I entry into World War II era. He's taken over all of Germany, made it his own. He's killed approximately at this point 6 million Jews, alongside homosexuals and alongside gypsies or anybody that was not Aryan. So he's made it a point to try to create this homogeneous utopia for the German people. And he was almost successful in doing so. But he was really aggressive and vengeful in many ways. He stopped making those war reparation payments. He went against the Non-Aggression Pact. He killed a lot of people, the Allied powers in the Dieppe raid. And he created this rage amongst his SS army in order to go ahead and attack even innocent people. So when we look at some of the battles that we were involved in collaborating with the British and alongside the United States as the Allied powers, we had 70,000 lives lost. And in Blitzkrieg, which was an invasion of Germany attacking London, when we tried to protect London as best as we could, 32,000 lives lost then. And when the Germans invaded Russia, which happened probably about 5 to 6 times during World War II, 26.6 million dead, and in total, over 80 million military and civilian lives lost during World War II. So here we are, where Russians enter Germany, and they're finally able to see the Holocaust in Hitler's bunker. So if you zoom in on this picture a little bit, you'll be able to see that this is actually a group of pregnant women with small babies, and they were hiding out in the fields and they're Jewish women. Hitler was trying to do everything possible to kill all of the women who were pregnant, so to not have Jews procreate. Another operation is Operation Barbarossa, where the Germans were able to invade Russia and killed almost 1 million people. They were successful for a little while, but Russia ended up fighting back with them because the Russians were used to the winter conditions of Russia and the Germans weren't. So it was because of their ability to climatize that they were able to succeed over the German army. So we prepared for so many unexpected attacks of the Germans. During World War II, the Germans fought a really dirty war. They were going into areas where there were innocent civilians. And if you watch the movie Saving Private Ryan, the very last scene, you can see that soldiers are trying to struggle and scramble in order to protect innocent civilians, especially when we're getting into Eastern European countries and Italy as well. And because of that, we bore a lot of the brunt of casualties in Dieppe, with 913 killed in just one battle. And over 1,900 of our soldiers were taken prisoner by the Germans themselves. So things are a little different now. We're trying to invade on different fronts. We had to completely change our battle strategies in comparison to World War I. We had to get more sneaky and more strategic. So this is the Battle of Dieppe and how we're trying to invade. And this is the way that the Canadian infantry's designed their planning attack. They designed that. So as you can see, you can read some of the names here that they would kind of divide themselves out into geographical categories. So you would try to be with people who are kind of familiar with your geographical area. They did the best that they could to create that camaraderie amongst soldiers. So Operation D-Day was set to be successful, and they were hoping that D-Day would be the end of the war, and it was slowly getting there. The Battle of the Atlantic, which was initiated by the Allied forces, the Germans continued to attack the convoys. So convoys were small ships that were used in place of the U-boats that were used during World War I. So if you do remember, the German U-boat would sail and slip under seas. It was this big, huge boat. It ends up hitting the Lusitania during World War I, and these were the ships that were used in World War One. It would take forever to take this supplies from one land to the other. So what they did was they created this convoy system of smaller ships. And then that way, then they could move faster. They're kind of like the Corvettes of ships during the time. And they would move faster across the ocean in order to get supplies to our soldiers overseas. Well, the Germans in the Battle of the Atlantic started to attack them, and we continued to attack back. And it was actually a very prideful moment for Canada, the Battle of Atlantic. And the reason why was because it really helped to increase our naval power. Our Canadian naval power was very small, and it consisted of just 11 ships with over 20,000 sailors. And by the end, we had doubled that in terms of ships, and more than doubled that. We got up to 400 ships with 113,000 personnel, including 7,000 women. So we continued to grow and diversify during the war. And I think the reason why we highlight the Canadian contributions to the war is because of the reputation that it leaves us with as a country on a global scale. We'll talk a little bit more about that in our post-war era. So Stalingrad was also a very important place because it was the entryway in which supplies were getting to soldiers. So when we have control of this area, we control what supplies are going to be coming into our soldiers, whether they be the Axis or the Allied powers. So both sides were always really looking to capture Stalingrad. So capturing Stalingrad meant that you were catching the wind of the war. So this was a turning point when the Russians were able to defeat the Germans and take control of Stalingrad. That meant that we had power over our resources again, and we were able to kind of successfully move forward. And this defeat meant that 5.5 million soldiers were actually lost their lives to this battle. So you can see here that there's the Caspian Sea where we would be, and here's Turkey. And this would be the entryway from North America into Europe in order for us to get supplies to our soldiers that needed them. And there's Stalingrad. So that would be where we would try to run over. And as you can see here, there's Moscow. And we were doing the best that we can to, it also has oil here. And Hitler was really interested in having this area because oil means wealth, but we were able to capture it back. So we continued to have more and more victories, and we were able to have an assault on Italy. And Italy was ready to welcome us with open arms, as I told you about before. And a part of Egypt has now been invaded and recaptured. In Operation Overlord, Mussolini is turning up dead, and Italy happily surrenders to us on September 8, 1945. Up until this point, Mussolini was very similar to Hitler, but he torturized and kind of starved all of the Italian citizens, regardless of whether they were Aryan or not. Whereas Hitler decided that he wanted to save the Aryan race, and they were treated very well. Normandy is selected as a place of attack in order to continue. So we had the Dieppe raid where we lost a lot of soldiers from the Allied power, and very close to that was the Normandy beach, and Normandy with the Juno beach, and we're able to kind of invade in that way, as you can see over here. And we're hoping that this is the beginning of the end of the war. And it looks like we were successful in doing so. On June 6, 1944, the beaches of Normandy are invaded, and the Allied powers are successful. So the Atlantic Wall, which if we were to go back here, which was constructed all around here to kind of it was constructed all here to basically protect, the Germans put it up to protect the land that they had taken over from France, which is Normandy, France. So they had built this barrier structure so that if any of the Allied powers came, then they would be aware of their entrance. But the Allied powers were still able to plan around that and continued the attack. So if you look here, this is the Omaha Beach. So this is like a typical cross section that you would see where they would be setting this up. So here's the beach over here where the land is. Here's the different Belgian gates that they tried to set up. Then they tried to set up these hedgehogs over here, which are crossings, to make it difficult to get into the beach. Because if they wanted to, they couldn't slide in because they had already made all these barriers over here. And they couldn't come from above because they had machine guns ready to go that were faced forward. So there was a lot that was happening. And here's an actual picture of what Germany had set up in order to protect the beaches of Normandy that they had invaded and taken over at the very early parts of the war. But we pushed through them anyways, and we're still going strong, and the Germans continue to move forward and They had already taken over Belgium and Luxembourg, which were neutral territories during the war. Despite that, Germany really wanted to have control over them, and they were successful in obtaining them. And during the Battle of the Bulge, we weakened the German army, and the Americans stood strong to push through. So here you see that there's the invasion that's happening. This is actually a picture of Mussolini and his family. What happened was that Mussolini had been hung by his people. The Italian people were just tired and frustrated. They didn't want to have anything to do with him anymore. So on April 30th, Mussolini, and what they did was they hung him and his family in the town square. And the body hung there for weeks as a celebration to the end of the war, or their participation in the war effort. So Hitler heard about that, and that's part of the reason why he decided to commit suicide, and he killed his partner Eva Braun alongside their dog, because he didn't want to end up being hung in shame the same way that his friend Mussolini was. So we see here that this is the invasion of Germany. Finally, the Allied powers are able to go in, and if you zoom in on this picture, you can see here that what they've done is they've gone to the Reichstag, which is the old German parliament. And what the Russians did was they went and they plotted their flag on top of the German parliament to show that they had finally invaded and taken over the land. By February 8, 1945, the Allied powers were in Berlin, which means that they are now officially invaded into Germany, officially defeated the German powers. And on May 8, 1945, after Hitler has committed suicide, the Germans officially surrender, and we call this day VE. So if you can look to see here, this is a picture. Germany kaput, Italia tutto finito. Here we come Canada. So these are soldiers. And if you compare the condition of the soldiers from World War I to World War II, what is it that you see? They're healthier, they seem happier. And that was the reason why, is because we learned a lot of lessons from World War I, and we definitely applied them to World War II. And Canada made a much bigger impact on the war than they did in World War I. So here we have a picture of downtown Toronto. Canadian troops liberated most of Netherlands, and they surrendered. The Germans formally surrendered. So you can see here that we're finally celebrating and excitement. And we are